cyber ethics term sort of buzzing a little bit. You were just telling me like, hey, you know, that this is kind of going around as much as digital citizenship, the new kind of buzzish term. Cyber ethics wise, what's coming up in that? What is that umbrella? What's hot there right now?
Well, Dan, I think what's hot is just all these tech startups you're looking at. They affect so many different areas outside of just selling an app. Really, when you look at a lot of these companies, you have to look at it from an ethical, legal, emotional, and sociological standpoint. You take something like Uber, right? Uber is massively affecting how we get around, the community. Same thing with Airbnb. But you really have to look at those from ethical issues. So going back to Uber, well, how does it affect taxi cabs? How does it affect the going rate for medallions in New York City, which is up to $1 million? What about the libertarian bent of allowing anybody to be a quote-unquote taxi cab driver? What are the regulations? So there's a ton of ethical issues that are coming up. So as our technology has become so powerful, this really comes into play that we need to focus on its kind of ethical ramifications. And I mean this in a positive way, that we can really look at it from a multidisciplinary fashion, right? So Silicon Valley has been very successful in getting us to adopt these products, but now is a time where we need to bring in lawyers and psychologists and school teachers and philosophers to say, well, what is this technology doing, and what's the best way we can adopt this tech for society at large?
Yeah, and I think that the challenge there, I mean, luckily I think there's some smart folks thinking about that. Not as much as maybe I'd prefer in my ideal world, but the governance of emerging
smart guy.
Yeah, the governance of emerging technology conference at ASU, and some folks that are focusing on sort of interdisciplinary conversations around sort of what future pictures we're painting with fiction and how that translates to business and how that affects the world. I think there's folks there, but I think you're right. I mean, the real incentives in terms of who wants to be the biggest hustlers is in the business domain, and I think that's fine. As an entrepreneur, I mean, I think that's relatively natural, but there's not as much incentive potentially for all the lawyers to catch up, partially because it seems as though it's tougher to sort of get out the net and prepare for that issue. Because who would have, nobody 2 years before Uber was saying, you know what, I know it's coming. Like, where's that guy who's raising his hand? Where's the guy that's raising his hand about even Airbnb? And there's so many more obscure examples.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas 50 years ago, you'd have a much better grasp of what a reasonable tech transition would be. So I think it's tough to capture it, and it's tough to incentivize the folks you were talking about to jump in at the same level of involvement.
Well, here's an example, Dan, right? Somebody recently, as you're I'm sure well aware of, got drunk and flew a drone into the White House lawn, right? So think about that. The FAA, for these regulations, they were asked in 2011 to do some regulations on drones. How big can they be? How fast can you fly them? How high can they be? How high can they not be? Where can they
shoot lasers?
They're still working on the regulations from 2011. Yeah. So to your earlier point, Dan, the tech is moving so quickly, but our bureaucracy isn't. So honestly, I think we're seeing a huge conflict in how quickly we adapt technology and how quick our government moves. So I think it's been kind of a frustrating point where we say, you know what, there's so many cool things we can do, but at the same time, there's certain downsides, like flying a drone into the White House, right? So we need to be able to have a government that can quickly react to this new tech in a way that can be proactive and that can ensure the safety of our society at large, but at the same time not slow down the innovation process. Because honestly, that's why Silicon Valley is capturing the imagination of the average American, or really the average world citizen, in that they're getting stuff done. And that's cool. You take guys like Elon Musk and you're saying, I like what they're doing. They're actually they're the new NASA, right? SpaceX. They're going out there and they're saying, let's go to Mars. Who's not doing that is our government at large, and not to really pick on it, but I think that's been the tricky part, is that we've moved a lot of our focus as a society to the private commercial world of tech companies, and they're getting stuff done, but at the same time, they don't necessarily have a lot of the regulatory concerns that the average American would, and that in the past has always relied on governmental agencies. But it seems an open question of whether those agencies are kind of up to task in terms of efficiency. It's not the efficiency that we expect when we can get anything in a very short period of time, right? Going to the DMV is not your epitome of efficiency.
No.
And it's not what we're getting used to. You know, Dan, you and I are probably so used to this smooth functioning that we have, right? And the joke goes, there's an app for that, but how are we going to get the rest of society to kind of go at that same quick pace? Because there's a lot we can harness if done correctly.
Yeah, I agree. You know, the question on my end, you know, I'm always you know, I don't consider myself a pessimist or an optimist. I wouldn't attach to any pole at all, but I have an inkling that there would need to be a real war drum to get the government to adapt in a way that's going to be, you know, we might use nerdy startup-y terms like agile, right? We would use something like that. You know, in order to get them to keep up with what's going on at a level where we can not squelch, but regulate some of the ramifications of what, I mean, you know, you're going to be, we haven't gotten to the tip of the iceberg of the real deal considerations, of course. There's a lot that's coming down the pike in the next couple decades. You know, the pessimistic part of me says we're going to have a lot of drones hit a lot of White House buildings, and we're going to have a lot of Uber drivers make a lot of mess ups. We're going to have a lot of people, you know, we're going to have to, the America at large will have to marshal their own attentions to this topic, and the governance of emerging technology is still just not coming close to Justin Bieber music videos in terms of actual attention. And so I think that we're going to struggle there, and that we may need a, you know, I mean, to make an analogy that's relatively extreme, a sort of Pearl Harbor-esque event. You know, not that I'm hoping it's that tragic.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, I think for a lot of people, this drone incident was something of that was kind of a light bulb, because not to think worst case scenario, but obviously people are paid to think worst case scenario. With the drone incident on the White House, you have to think, oh my God, you know, obviously it was a harmless incident, but what if it wasn't? Is it possible where it could be a terrorist attack? How do we control that? How do we shoot down drones? How should we police drones? What should we be able to get when we go to Radio Shack? So I'm sure Radio Shack is psyched that they got cited by President Obama recently. You know, you hardly ever hear the Shack.
They're sort of, that's a nice.
I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it's tough. Well, another issue, Dan, that I was just reading about today is the lovely world of revenge porn. And revenge porn, that's it's kind of a colorful term for when a usually ex-boyfriend posts a intimate photo of their own ex, right? So a guy and a girl break up. The boyfriend has nude photos of the woman, and he says, "Hey, there's websites on right now that are looking for ex-girlfriend nude photos and videos." But now, from that female standpoint, how do you get those taken down? So they're actually taking a novel approach of copyright infringement.
Whoa. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that there's going to be so many. I mean, I don't know how that was regulated in the old days. In other words, like, I'm not sure if, you know, in the Polaroid times, if you could basically publish whatever you wanted of whoever in whatever context in whatever newspaper. And I'm not sure if that would translate digitally, but I think it is an important point that how many ways could that be sliced and diced in terms of video and pictures and whatever else, and how many of the existing newspapery regulations would translate into how that's governed on the web, and how many ways, and also how damn hard it is to get rid of it once it's up.
Well, there you go. I mean, I think that's always the problem is as you know, the laws for a lot of these tech companies has been very favorable to them to basically say a tech company is not going to be held responsible for the information up on their website. So take something like Craigslist. A few years ago, there was because you're in the Cambridge, Boston area, you remember the Craigslist killer.
Yep.
Right? He was the guy who went on Craigslist, and he was looking for prostitutes because everybody knew that you could probably find prostitutes in the erotic section that they no longer have.
Yeah.
He found them and then killed a few people. But it became an incident where do we put more pressure on Craigslist, or do we basically take that libertarian bent where we say, hey, it's just bad ideas that are going to sort out naturally? Do we kind of do we put a lot of faith in this kind of invisible hand or marketplace of ideas type of concept? And the other issue along that's going on right now is think about YouTube, right? The very channel that we're on right now. YouTube is obviously having a problem with ISIS videos. So you've got cool videos, hopefully like this one, but then you also have really horrendous videos that you frankly don't want a lot of people to see, do you? Right? Do you want to see beheading videos?
Yeah. So actually, I'm not as familiar. I've seen some relatively troubling ISIS footage. Is there a wave here with YouTube and ISIS and sort of a little bit of a duke out about what should be allowed there? What have you seen in terms of kind of the battle on that front?
Oh yeah, well the battle is that obviously YouTube will instantly take down that type of material once it's found out, but YouTube is such a popular source of content that they haven't been able to sort that out before it gets posted. So unfortunately, ISIS has been very successful from a social media standpoint in terms of getting out their information. I remember last year just being really kind of disturbed by the fact that ISIS could hashtag the World Cup in using a beheading photo. They actually send around a picture of a head, a human head, with the hashtag, hey, this is our football. Hashtag World Cup. I mean, that's saying that's a pivotal moment to really say perhaps a lot of these tech companies need to take some ethical ownership. And I really do think if we're looking at the next 5 years, I think a lot of these companies like Google are actually getting the message, and they're saying, you know what, we're so large right now, we're so influential in freedom of speech, things of that nature, that we're going to take on a more active role. Obviously, the problem is they're so large and with so much content that they don't want to take on the legal responsibility. But from a social standpoint, I really do think that Google and Facebook, Twitter, they're going to take on an active role to say, you know what, we care. Talk about digital citizenship.
Yeah.
They do want to be a caring member of society, and frankly, having ISIS videos on YouTube goes against that because that's not something we want to see.
Yeah, that's quite a curious issue. You know, the incentives are so piled and in so many different directions. You know, like ultimately, again, the legal ownership, that's a whole bunch of additional risk. But of course, you also, here's the deal. Like, when you had mentioned Google wants to be a digital citizen, I mean, for me, man, like whether they want to be a digital citizen or not, that's what you tell the populace. Period.
Yeah.
You don't not tell them that, because otherwise the populace does not like you. And so they have to at least put on that front. Now, and I'm sure they have, good hearts and all that. I'm just saying, whether it was out of their own, high moral loft or whether it was out of appeasing humanity, they would have to put on that front. It's curious though, like you had mentioned, how much legal mumbo jumbo do they want to be paying out the wazoo for? But how can they still appease governments, appease people? I think it'll be curious to see how the incentives sort their way out through governmental agencies and through companies.
Well, this actually happened a few years ago for Google, is that they generally take a very hands-off approach to what you can find out on a Google search. But I remember a few years ago there was something very offensive that was posted about Michelle Obama, and Google did take that extraordinary step of deleting that, of taking that out, right? And that's where, as you know, you've really seen a distinction with how the average American views what should be available and how the average European, right, our European counterparts, with their whole concept of the right to be forgotten. The fact that they're pushing privacy so much compared to America that they're actually doing court orders to say, I want this information deleted from a Google search. It's still available on the internet at large, but frankly, everybody uses Google as kind of the gateway. So
Yeah.
kind of like a tree falls in the woods. If it's not found on a Google search, does it even exist?
No, no,
It doesn't
totally not.
exist. You know, it's somewhere else on the interwebs. But if I can't get it on a Google search, you
Where are you
know,
gonna go? You know, yeah, you're not gonna go on Alta Vista.
exactly, exactly.
So, curious, yeah, and that's interesting as well as how will companies adapt to the cultural norms and desires of the populaces of the various nations in which they function. Uber didn't want to just hang out in the Bay Area. Uber wants to be in all the cars.
Oh, yeah.
Uber wants them all, man. They're playing Pokemon, man. I mean, it's like how will Mexico will Germany, in the future, will Japan, how much of their company is going to have to alter? How many of their policies are going to have to alter? How much of their processes and their appeasing of governments and people will alter from country to country as well?
Well, I think that's been kind of the difficult part, right, Dan, is that something like Facebook, since they're in all of these countries, how do they distinguish between their kind of American ethos that they might have, and saying, okay, well, how does this translate when we're in Turkey? Because I know they recently had an issue there with pictures or information dealing with Muhammad, with how they might have to be a little more sensitive to that information in that sphere. So I think for a lot of people are curious, is the kind of American ideal of freedom of speech, which is majorly different than a lot of other countries, is that something that's going to be pervasive throughout the world at large, based on the fact that we have these very powerful tech companies? Or is something like Facebook and Twitter, are they going to be very agile to all the different kind of social mores of all these different countries?
Yeah, I have an inkling. Yeah, I couldn't tell you where the pendulum's going to go, David, and it's not there's no crystal ball here, but I predict pendulums and vacillation in that domain, in terms of trends, over decades potentially, around the general trajectory of different, if a certain number of events marshal, to be frank, I think it's going to have to do with the populace. I think that if Germany sort of, if Germany becomes hip to it and they sort of ease up a bit, and some other folks ease up a bit, and then it's possible that'll go down. I think that maybe so if there's enough benefits conveyed there, or maybe even detriments of over privacy and hiding of potentially valuable information, maybe that will spook. And I think it's going to be the negative that prompts them more than the positive, such as large swaths of humanity.
Yeah.
That it will be, what'll spook them about privacy versus what'll spook them about openness. Where that trend kind of branches off, I think will sort of dictate a bunch of that. I think the companies, though, would really like, at least in general, the companies would really prefer our Silicon Valley folks, and not because they're bad people at all, but I think they'd prefer to promote the virtue of said openness.
Oh, of course. Yeah, because I think that's
a powerful force in this conversation and molding humanity's thoughts around it.
Definitely. And I think to kind of to wrap up with a lot of these points, you take something like Uber, and it's in their financial interest to be a little more cognizant of just the general public and what their feelings are. And frankly, I think they have been. I think they got their hands slapped because they were maybe a little bit out of whack with the mainstream public on a few issues. But now they're turning that around, because if you really look at it, if you step back from a lot of the Uber issues, their basic service is going to prevail because it's far more efficient.
Faster. I literally, ever since I got the app, I have not touched a single taxi cab.
Well, I was thinking about it the other day. I was in New York yesterday, and I was like, well, Uber works because it allows everybody to kind of have that town car type of feeling.
Better. See you later.
Only available to the uber wealthy, if you will, a few years back. In addition, as they talked about, because medallions are so expensive, because it's based on the concentration, taxis would be surrounded in the areas around Times Square as opposed to less popular spaces. So if you think about it, the taxi service was an industry that needed to be disrupted, and you're finding that in a lot of different areas, is that after the chips fall and these tech companies adjust, if they adjust correctly and in a kind of a positive PR way, they should be successful, because the experience from the consumer standpoint should be something that's better. And what Uber offers is a better experience. It's an easier way to get around. So as long as they're cognizant of their public at large and kind of react in a way that's very kind of friendly, so to speak, it is going to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it as well. You know, no matter how you slice it up, down, or sideways, the people that make better mousetraps are going to have a big sway over both the populace
Yes.
and the trajectory of tech.
Definitely, definitely.
Boom.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's end on that. That's a good note to end on. So, yeah, I appreciated you having me here, Dan. I think this is a good conversation, but it's just the tip of the iceberg, as you point out. So I think there's many more conversations to be had.
Indeed, brother. It's great to hear your thoughts as well, my man.
All right. See ya.
Cool.